What happens when AI goes rogue? It goes off the rails and hacks into third-party companies. Are you responsible? Who is responsible? And how should sovereign governments respond? Stick around and listen to Brian, Campbell, and Mike and their takes. And we invite you to subscribe at 3takesonai.com or follow us on YouTube or Spotify. So welcome to, I believe it's episode number 19 of 3 Takes on AI. Mike Campbell and I this week are going to talk about something very important. There are a number of frontier models, whether it's Anthropic, OpenAI, and now Meta, that are all talking about breaches that AI goes rogue. These frontier models, these large models, and what happens when they do go rogue. And what I think is interesting about it, there are multiple aspects of it. Number one, what happens when they go rogue? What is really the risk? I think Anthropic in particular actually hacked into 3 companies. OpenAI actually, Hugging Face, it compromised that, which has a lot of these open source and open weight models available in the market. So there are a number of different ways that they can cause harm. But the question has to be what happens when they do go rogue. And I think where I'll start, and then I'm going to pass it to Campbell, but is the models don't go rogue alone, and that is they have to be called by a prompt or an API. And so whoever's engaging, if you look at what Anthropic and OpenAI and Meta were doing, they were testing their models using agents and other code to see how they would behave. So without that initiative, there's no way for a model on its own to go rogue. So the question is, I think the questions on the table are, how do you make sure if they do go rogue, or what does that really mean? Who's responsible for it? And more importantly, in the long run, how do we protect companies and citizens and intellectual property from going rogue? Campbell, you did a great, I brag about it every week, a great, was it a webcast or whatever? I don't know if that company was
Yeah.
in the Middle East where you talked about the EU AI Act. And I wrote recently in a Substack article that I think the European Union has this right. So I want to get your opinion about going rogue, but also a little bit of a highlight of regulation done right, I think.
Yeah. I think it's a good intro. And I'm going to sort of reference your Substack article a couple of times, but I want everybody to suspend disbelief for a minute. Um, I don't know if anybody has seen the film called The Gathering Storm. So it's about the sort of the lead up to World War II with Winston Churchill. And there's a wonderful poem that is quoted in that film called The Clattering Train. I think it's actually called something else, but it was written back in the Victorian time. And I'm going to read it to you, very short, but it is very applicable to the this concept of the kill switch. So it starts by saying the axles creak and the couplings strain. The pace is hot and the points are near, and sleep has deadened the driver's ear, and the signals flash through the night in vain, for death is in charge of the clattering train. Now, trains typically have a dead man switch, so that obviously if the driver falls asleep or is sort of otherwise taken out of running the train, the switch shuts the train down. Now, if you look at this concept of kill switch when it comes to AI, there's a couple of things that we can think about this. That even though all of these lights are flashing in the night in vain, warning of an impending accident or catastrophe, the driver has fallen asleep because he has sort of become aware of, he's just sort of fallen asleep to the sort of the monotonous drone of what's going on a day-to-day basis. So I'm going to now apply that to AI. In the US, I think what's happened is that, yeah, the government has woken up and realized the fact that, okay, we really haven't been listening to what's going on. We don't really understand what these major US vendors are doing, the frontier model vendors are doing. So let's put in a kill switch and be done with it. And we're going to put it on the developers. That is wrong in so many different ways. If we now then look and reflect on the EU AI Act, the EU AI Act has a whole series of articles and sections and criteria that are applied to various players in the AI space. Frontier models developers obviously are seen as the provider and the creator of that technology, but it gets very muddy. As we can see in the US, that Google and Anthropic and all of the major ones, they're developers, but they're also deployers at the same time, which has implications in the US. Now, what's really good about the EU is that the EU AI Act categorically segments the supply chain so that the developers have responsibilities, deployers, distributors, resellers, users, consumers, they all have roles and responsibilities to play in how the frontier model is deployed. And to your point, Brian, it's not just the model, it's agents, it's API calls, it's integration points. I think that a lot of the political players in the space obviously don't understand the technology itself. And I think there needs to be what we're finding in general around AI is that there needs to be a higher degree of education for people. Um, just in the way, in the fact of understanding, like fundamentally what it is in layman's terms, not in technical terms. But so I'm going to just basically say that the EU AI Act, I think, is the primary um, great example of that. And I think, Brian, as you said, there was a webinar that I did. It was touching on the EU AI Act as a territory itself, but for organizations outside of that territory. Now, what they're going to have is like if you look at Google and all of those, they're coming from the US into the EU, and EU companies that are going the opposite way have what's called, extraterritorial factors that they have to consider. So, what are the governance rules and the regulations for a frontier model that exists in the EU playing in North America or in America per se? So there's a whole series of things that have not been taken into consideration on how that plays out. There's local regulations and audits, and then there's obviously things like the EU AI Act. I think the Kill Switch Act itself is not, it's a knee-jerk reaction that has to be thought out more categorically. But again, I'll probably reference the poem again as we wrap up. But those are my initial thoughts. I don't know, Mike.
Mike, do you have a
Oh, okay. I was waiting to be prompted here. I think the poem is super appropriate. Um, there's a few things here top of mind for me. One is, on the AI going rogue. I won't mention the name of the professional services firm, but there's one firm that has been supposedly directly responsible for three of the breaches. And in each instance, it's been a similar mistake, human error on their side. Now, perhaps there will be repercussions to that business, just in, the natural consequences of businesses not wanting to work with them anymore. But I haven't seen any news saying that they basically are out of business, which is a bit staggering to me. And perhaps there is uh, a legislative need for the government to step in and actually close them down. And I'm saying that as a capitalist. If you cannot be responsible with the tools that we have, powerful as they are, then it may require government oversight. But I think the bigger issue here is it's twofold. One is something that I talk about in sales and have been for years. And the other is simply a fact of where we are. Again, I'm speaking mostly to the US government. The US government is controlled by elected officials that are older. They come from non-technical backgrounds, and they do not have to go through the same type of cybersecurity and AI training that corporate people do, which creates a lack of awareness and a vulnerability. And I think that that is completely wrong and it's dangerous. And then the second part of it is that we know it's like, I talk about not selling to pain because pain isn't what makes a business change. It's not what makes a person change. People don't go to the doctor because they're in pain. So when you are now in an untenable situation or facing an untenable situation, and I think that there's a fairly uniform agreement across public and private sector that we are in a painful situation with AI. We don't understand it. It's not well controlled. It's not well regulated. It's perhaps the most powerful tool and weapon we've had in our history. And we understand the dangers that come with it, especially from bad actors. But we have not taken the necessary steps to protect the citizens and the government from how these tools can and will be used. And that probably won't change until something really awful happens.
So I actually, two pieces of this to me, or three really. Number one, the EU AI Act got it right, and not because of what they ended up with, but they actually legislated the requirement, and then they turned it over to experts who did understand AI to create the policy. And that would be a great model for this government to take. We've actually been through this already, and that is the SEC took up cybersecurity. If you remember a while back, a breach at a bank or something was not a financial responsibility or a reportable responsibility for publicly traded companies, and now it is. So a CEO or a C-suite executive, not only is the organization liable, but the executive can be held liable as well. And the issue here is it's not what they implemented from an internet or an application. It's actually the end result of what that cyber attack was to the deployer of the technology itself. That doesn't mean, let's assume that a bank had a breach and it was because of a bad firewall or some technology. They certainly civilly could go after the supplier of the technology, but they're actually holding responsible who is the actual end touch to the customer or to the market or whatever being impacted. And I think that's what AI needs to do. You couldn't very well say a Claude model, an Anthropic model, sitting idly by created a rogue effort. It was the tester involved. It was who wrote the test with, and truthfully, there's a lot of talk about you can blame the end company that did the testing, is the Chinese model that came out, but each of the providers of these models was not open source. So you can see, and the other thing about it really, but you can't see the data that it was trained on. There's so many more models, so that's an open source model technologies, and this becomes important because China could be trained, the data it trained on could be biased toward China and against the US or other countries. And we would not, so we would be prompting and being happy. And so by just targeting these large frontier model providers and these large revenue entities that are providing, we're not touching the end customer that probably is being impacted by the companies using those models. We're not, we don't have broad view of what's going to look like for all the other models that are in market that are becoming popular out there. We're going to be proud of ourselves for protecting ourselves until, as you mentioned, like something really bad occurs.
Yeah, I think yeah that well I think we could probably have a complete discussion just about the whole open source, open weights factors around just models as well. But that actually plays into the factor about, how do you stop it? But I think the technology itself is obviously built to do specific things. I think there's the factor that the humans weren't necessarily in the loop properly. But I think coming back to the kill switch, The kill switch only makes sense where the lever is actually placed. So, take the train
Mm.
analogy. If you put the dead man switch back in the club car versus in the engine, then obviously, you're failed to put in a safe system. Um, so the act itself, is targeting the largest developers because they control the inference infrastructure. Most deployers physically can't shut a model down mid-run. So putting the switch downstream is putting it where there's no hand that would be placed on it. So again, I think this act hasn't really necessarily looked at the entire, what I call supply chain of AI technology and or where humans reside within it to effectively, ensure that the switch exists or the lever exists where it should exist that makes the most sense. I mean, if you have Anthropic and Claude and all of those, sorry, if you have Claude running, or if you have Google and if you have ChatGPT running from these infrastructures, and you've got a enterprise license, so you've got sort of an isolated environment, you as the organization fundamentally are going to be carrying some of that responsibility. Again, that's another example of the EU AI Act. Even though the company is leasing from, let's say, Anthropic and Google and or OpenAI, they are part of the supply chain now, or the value chain, and then therefore they own certain liabilities of that process. So the lever potentially needs to go further and further down to where it makes fundamental sense. If you have that lever. I mean, the great thing about, myself as an organization, like if I install OpenClaw on my Mac Mini and it goes rogue, well, I can just unplug it. But again, that's just like a physical kill switch. But the lever needs to exist in the right place, and I think this act is putting it in the wrong place. Um, you have information asymmetry. Developers know the model's failure modes. Deployers mostly can't audit the model's internals due to the fact that it's not open source or open weight. So expecting a downstream company to catch what even the lab can't fully characterize is just it's unrealistic. And that lets, the party with the most knowledge and profit off easiest. So, this act has just been done incorrectly throughout all parameters, from my perspective.
Yeah, I think you're spot on again also on the levers and where they need to exist. And it's where, I'm going to land back on, the rationale for the AI board of directors, because these are the questions and the policies that should be put in place. And coming from the questions and answers before AI investments are made in any business. Who has control? Who has access? What are the implications? How do we stop it when it goes rogue or when there's a problem? Who do I hold responsible? What have I told employees they can and cannot do as it relates to AI? What are the implications for them if they do something that they are not supposed to do? Like I haven't heard of anybody being terminated for improper use of AI, though I know companies have deployed models of a corporate license of ChatGPT or Gemini. Okay, well, have we heard of anybody being terminated because somebody used Perplexity in that organization? No. So that says we're probably not enforcing these rules. It I'm actually going to, I keep thinking about like the credit card industry, financial services. Credit card fraud is a multi-billion-dollar issue. It is a pain for consumers and banks alike. But we haven't reached a situation where it's untenable. So the banks are electing to eat those billions of dollars, in some cases pass it on to the consumers and, in credit card fees and such. But let's be honest. The banks could stop most credit card fraud if they really wanted to do that. They just don't want to do it. So they haven't. And the same applies here to the ramifications and the issues with AI. We know to your analogy, Campbell, the train is moving down the track right now, relatively slowly. It's going to pick up speed, and as it picks up speed, it's going to be harder and longer to stop it. And
I,
yeah,
I think the credit card example is good, but you're going to not like it because they do know the risk, right? And they do implement technology in flight to try and detect fraud. But they've made a decision on what the risk is. If they tightened it up so there was no fraud, they would probably tighten, we would see a recession, right? Because consumer spending and the whole ecosystem that they've created, and they would lose fees and things that they're also depending on. But they've made a decision in the environment, they're deploying a solution, they have a transaction, they're deploying technology, AI, other brands of technology are out there trying to accelerate their ability to detect fraud in flight. If you're looking at AI and you have this AI board, you're deploying a solution, the organization should be, and I think, Kim, I'm a little bit disagreeing with you, the organization that's implementing the AI solution, let's say to do card fraud detection,
mhm.
they own the liability if for that purpose, for some reason they've disclosed personal information. Um, they have not approved valid charges, all the things that they've implemented the solution for. And if there was some breach, they should be liable. That doesn't mean they should be implementing the right governance because a that card system shouldn't be able to go rogue. There should be enough governance and software and middleware around it to prevent just because the model or the prompt causes a potential rogue activity doesn't mean that that rogue activity should be executed. And
Yeah,
and then um, it's almost like we're going to regulate the depot, but the train already left the building, right?
right.
So we need to really be regulating where the train is and where it's going, not just where it started. And right now, we're focused on the depot where these large frontier models, and it's not even touching. I mean, and
It,
by the way, the three breaches would all be excluded from the Kill Switch Act because
you're
they were in
you're
testing mode.
you're right,
So
Brian.
the act wouldn't even do any good.
Yeah, we're focused on the depot and the station, and forgetting that there are bandits all along the railway
Absolutely.
waiting to jump on the train and steal all the gold, right? And rob all the passengers. It's just it's on one hand mystifying to me that we are where we are, and on the other hand, you can look at all of the historical patterns and say, oh yeah, here we are again, here we are again. It's just um,
It,
yeah.
it, and then I'll behave myself. It comes down fundamentally the people that are doing the legislation in this country, and even worse, the people that are reporting on it, don't either want to explain how it works or they don't understand how it works. I
Yeah,
posted an article. Um, John Stewart interviewed this person about AI. The first 3 minutes were absolutely great. And then to get his book sold, he went off into a different direction. He talked about different types of AI, but he didn't explain it that way. And if people understood, and you're not going to get the mass population understanding what vector math is and what it's really doing, right? But the people that are actually reporting on it, the people that are actually legislating, they probably need to do what they would traditionally have done in this country. The legislators would talk about it and they pass it down to their aides and they'd go do the hard work. And in this case, I think to get something out the door, either their aides don't understand it or it's just bad. So, um, Campbell, do you want to wrap it up with the poem and a final word or two?
Yeah, thank you. You read my mind. I think, Brian, I think we fundamentally do agree to a certain degree, at a certain point. But let me put it this way. Again, we're mixing metaphors or analogies with the poem, etc. So the Kill Switch Act is basically Congress trying to answer who's the driver. Right now, the bill's answer is the train maker, but the poem's answer is whomever's hand is on the throttle or the lever. When the signals start flashing, or to your point, Mike, that there's all of these bandits along the train route trying to get on board and like steal from it. And today, for most AI harms, that's the deployer. To your point, Brian, it's not the lab. And what I mean by the lab, obviously, is the lab that does the development of the technologies. So it is in the hands of that deployer, and I think the act has sort of fundamentally got that wrong. But anyway, that's my point. And again, I encourage you to see the film.
All right. Mike, any last words or shall we wrap it up?
I think we can wrap it up.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.